Muito boa tarde a todos. Welcome to our foreign visitors and participants. Nós vamos fazer esta sessão em português e em inglês. Tentaremos, como é desejável numa sessão após a hora do almoço, fazer uma sessão interativa, animada, participada e não apenas uma coleção de discursos. Eu, a título introdutório, sempre, o meu papel é o de ser o moderador do painel, um moderador interventivo, também direi de minha justiça. Eu, antes de passar a palavra a cada um dos membros presentes fisicamente no painel, como o Fernando já referiu, haverá um membro ausente, gostava de pôr uns números, uns dados em cima da mesa. Isto tem algo a ver com o impacto da revolução tecnológica, da inteligência artificial, da robótica, da automação, naquilo que é o futuro da sociedade, o futuro do emprego. E aquilo que eu gostaria de chamar a vossa atenção tem a ver com o facto de esta não ser a primeira vez que nós temos uma alteração significativa ou que se perspectiva uma revolução na organização social e no mundo do trabalho. E não estou a falar da revolução industrial, não estou a falar, digamos, de períodos passados. Os mais novos, sobretudo, acham que só agora é que se começou a fazer revolução tecnológica. Não, a revolução tecnológica tem muitos anos, tem milhares de anos. Mas chamar-vos a atenção para um aspecto. Um pequeno número de indicadores. Não vos vou amassar com demasiados indicadores. Num período de 25 anos recentes, isto é, entre 1998, mesmo no final do século XX, e 2023, ou se quiserem, final de 2022, foram 25 anos. Nesses 25 anos, nós olhando um pouco para trás, dizemos, ok, houve coisas novas, houve algumas alterações, mas a sociedade não mudou assim tanto quanto isso. E alguns até dirão, bem, do ponto de vista até da estrutura do emprego, isto funciona mais ou menos na mesma. Eu faço parte daqueles que já eram crescidos, como muitos de vós, em 98. E nós temos a ideia que as coisas não mudaram assim tanto. Ok, há mais tecnologia, a internet, que nessa altura estava a dar os primeiros passos, as redes sociais, mas basicamente isto funciona tudo na mesma. Nesses 25 anos, houve uma enorme revolução no mercado de trabalho português. E eu até vou me socorrer, que é para não vos dar números errados. Há um dado curioso. A diferença do volume total de empregos, isto é, a diferença do número total de empregos que existiam em 98 e no final de 2022, era 30 mil. Há mais 30 mil empregos do que no início de 98. Havia 4.850.000 empregos em Portugal em 98, havia 4.880.000. Ao longo desses 25 anos, a estrutura, a matriz, em termos volumétricos do mercado de trabalho português, é basicamente a mesma. E muito se passou, historicamente, houve crises, houve altos e baixos, e períodos de grande recessão, períodos de grande entusiasmo, bastante mais, infelizmente, mais de recessão do que de entusiasmo, mas entre o início e o fim desse período de 25 anos, o número de empregos é basicamente o mesmo. Okay? 30 mil em 4.800.000, 5 milhões é quase negligenciável. O que não é negligenciável, e a maioria das pessoas não tem isso na cabeça. Eu próprio não tinha antes de começar a pesquisar. Só para terem uma ideia, Na agricultura, e estamos a falar em 98, não estamos a falar da primeira metade do século XX, quando ainda Portugal era uma sociedade maioritariamente rural e agrícola. Estamos a falar no final do século. A agricultura, que pesava 12% no volume de emprego, havia mais de 500 mil de pessoas na agricultura, pesca e floresta. Havia quase 600 mil pessoas. Nesses 25 anos baixou para 2%. Perdeu praticamente 500 mil de empregos. A indústria, que nós achamos, à partida diríamos, há de ter variado um bocadinho para cima, um bocadinho para baixo. A indústria, leia-se para a indústria na classificação de profissões, é a indústria e construção, perdeu 500 mil de empregos. Eram 1.100.000 em 98, pesava 23% no volume de emprego, desceu para 623, portanto, passou a pesar 13%. Portanto, já perdemos 500 mil de empregos na agricultura, 500 mil de empregos na indústria e construção. Perdeu-se 1 milhão de empregos. Não. Senão a soma não ia dar o mesmo resultado que deu. É porque só na categoria de especialistas de atividades intelectuais e científicas a subida foi de praticamente 800 mil. Há mais 800, não chega, 750 mil empregos no domínio das atividades intelectuais e científicas. E no domínio dos técnicos e profissionais de nível intermédio, que pesava sensivelmente 8%, passou a pesar 12%, corresponde a uma passagem de cerca de 350, 400 mil para 600 mil em 25 anos. Porquê é que eu vos trago estes números? Porque uma grande parte do receio, que é legítimo, como teremos certamente a ocasião de ver, uma grande parte do receio com os efeitos da revolução tecnológica em curso, com a inteligência artificial, com a automação, com a robotização, não serão substancialmente diferentes do ponto de vista qualitativo daqueles que nós já conhecemos em anos mais recentes. Terão uma diferença significativa, quer do ponto de vista da rapidez do ciclo. A rotação vai ser muito mais rápida, já está a ser muito mais rápida, e colocará desafios muito grandes sobre os quais teremos a ocasião de falar. Não vou ocupar mais o microfone nesta introdução e, precisamente por ter tocado no ponto da inteligência artificial, vou interpelar a Catarina, que além de investigadora no Instituto de Sistemas e Robótica, também é professora no técnico, não investiga apenas, faz um pouco mais do que isso, mas que tem uma experiência muito particular no terreno concreto do dia-a-dia da inteligência artificial e numa área até muito em particular, que é a área da saúde, que é um dos domínios onde a inteligência artificial já tem e virá a ter um impacto absolutamente... não vou dizer devastador, porque senão isso pode ser mal interpretado, embora também possa ser devastador do ponto de vista do modelo, mas e com grandes benefícios para o ser humano, mas também com enormes desafios.
Ora, boa tarde. Em primeiro lugar, muito obrigada pelo convite para estar aqui. Isto é uma questão interessante. Portanto, referiu 1998. Eu, em 1998, tinha 10 anos. E posso-vos dizer que, nessa altura, ainda não era comum haver computadores em todas as casas. Portanto, os meus pais são ambos informáticos. Para mim, o computador foi uma realidade desde sempre. E eu era o sucesso das festas de anos, porque eu tinha computador, dava para jogar computador. E, de repente, o computador passou de um brinquedo para uma ferramenta. Para os meus pais já era uma ferramenta, para mim não era. E acho que uma transformação muito interessante nestes 25 anos é o computador ter se tornado uma ferramenta transversal. Portanto, há muitas profissões. Se nós formos a um café, a emissão de uma fatura é um computador. Se formos ao médico, hoje em dia as receitas já saem através de um computador, algumas delas já vão diretas para o nosso telemóvel. Este processo de digitalização da informação cresceu exponencialmente nestes 25 anos e tornou-se parte do nosso dia-a-dia, tipo todos temos tablets, todos temos telemóveis. O que nos últimos anos tem vindo a evoluir muito, e atenção que a inteligência artificial não é uma coisa de agora, portanto, se nós remontarmos ali ao Alan Turing e ao seu descodificador dos códigos e por aí fora, já existia o conceito de inteligência artificial antes. E mesmo estes modelos que nós hoje em dia usamos e que são fantásticos e que permitem criar músicas, conversam connosco, geram vídeos, os primeiros avanços nisto foi por volta dos anos 50, portanto, 1950. Os modelos que são utilizados hoje em dia surgiram em 1980, 1995. O avanço, grande parte do avanço, tem sido não só na área digital, mas também acompanhado um bocadinho pela área física. Portanto, um avanço fantástico na área dos sistemas, das arquiteturas de sistemas, de uma coisa que se calhar todos ouviram falar, que é a NVIDIA, e que tem gerado ferramentas que nos permitem, de facto, desenvolver estes modelos fantásticos. Falando um bocadinho da minha experiência, eu entrei no técnico em 2006, em 2010 estava a fazer a disciplina de inteligência artificial, ou desaprendizagem máquina. Nessa altura éramos cerca de 60, 2 raparigas. Atualmente eu dou essa disciplina, o número de alunos está perto dos 300. Portanto, para terem uma ideia dos números e do impacto e da percepção que as pessoas têm de como isto é importante hoje em dia para o mercado de trabalho. Pelo menos perceber um bocadinho. E quando eu digo alunos, não falo de alunos só de engenharia eletrotécnica, que é o meu departamento, ou de engenharia informática, falo de alunos de engenharia biomédica, engenharia química, engenharia do ambiente. Portanto, foi uma coisa que se tornou transversal a todas as áreas. E é engraçado, até se pensarmos agora nos prémios Nobel, portanto, que foram anunciados durante esta semana, Prémio Nobel da Física. 2 investigadores que contribuíram para as redes neuronais. Prémio Nobel da Química. Investigadores da área de computacional. 2 deles extremamente recentes, uma empresa extremamente recente, que é a DeepMind, e que a grande contribuição são modelos de criação de proteínas, portanto, de simulação de proteínas. Isto são avanços fantásticos e que não têm mais, tanto o grande boom começou em 2012. Portanto, em 12 anos, chegámos ao ponto em que estas contribuições são válidas de prémio Nobel. Chegámos ao ponto em que de 60 alunos temos 300 numa sala de aula. E estamos a falar do técnico. Há outras faculdades que têm números muito superiores aos nossos. Na área da saúde, e essa é a minha área, também tenho assistido a uma transformação muitíssimo interessante. Portanto, quando eu comecei a trabalhar nesta área e no doutoramento, era difícil arranjar um médico que quisesse colaborar comigo. Portanto, a diversão do médico que me propôs o primeiro tema era enganar os sistemas que existiam naquela altura para diagnosticar cancro da pele. Portanto, a diversão dele era, ok, vou pegar nesta imagem que eu sei que é muito difícil, vou dá-la ao sistema e vou ver o sistema a espalhar-se ao comprido. E ele dizia-me isto abertamente. E tinha esta atitude porque via estes sistemas como substituição do trabalho dele. Portanto, nós estávamos a desenvolver coisas que os iam substituir. Hoje em dia, portanto, obviamente, temos este conceito, temos sistemas para melhorar o diagnóstico, para acelerar o diagnóstico, mas também já começamos a provar à comunidade médica que estes sistemas podem ajudar na investigação médica, podem ajudar a avançar o conhecimento. Prova disso, na última semana recebi 2 e-mails de internos em hospitais portugueses diferentes que querem colaborar comigo nos projetos deles de internato. Portanto, os médicos jovens procuram cada vez mais trabalhar connosco também nesta área, não com medo da substituição, mas com o interesse do que é que isto pode trazer para o trabalho deles, para a vida deles, para o cuidado das pessoas. E, portanto, eu tenho tido o privilégio de acompanhar esta evolução. Quando eu comecei a trabalhar nesta área, ainda não era este grande boom, eu era pequenina. Agora, que nos últimos anos tenho visto este crescimento, mas tenho visto o crescimento das pessoas que trabalham nisto, mas também do público geral que não intervém com estes tópicos. Eu acho que é fantástico e é um tema para debate, que acho que podíamos estar aqui a tarde toda no prós e contras da inteligência artificial.
A tarde toda seria certamente curto, mas eu gostava de colocar, pegando nas palavras da Catarina e dirigindo-me à Katie, estamos nós sociedade, nós, centros de conhecimento, escolas, universidades, estamos a formar as pessoas para o mercado de trabalho que elas vão encontrar, não é daqui a 20 anos, é daqui a 2, 3, talvez até menos.
I think, yes, we are. We are training students for the short term rather than the long term. I'm not sure that it has ever been the case that we have been training students for the long term. Maybe others who are more wise and learned in this area could contribute. Maybe I'm a good example. I studied music for my undergraduate degree. I then went to work in charities in the UK, working on social issues, everything from trying to make the health service better to trying to tackle disability stigmatisation and also working on global poverty. Somehow I've ended up working in, thinking about and trying to figure out how to make AI better. That's not a trajectory I would ever have considered that I'd be on as a music graduate. And I don't think that's a bad thing, to be honest, because I also think sometimes we need people with careers in the humanities to be asking questions of technologists. And I think this comes back to the centre of the heart of what my team does. So I run something called the Centre for Collective Intelligence Design, which sounds very grand, but actually collective intelligence is at heart a very simple idea. It's that as humans, the way we have always progressed is by pooling our knowledge, our insights, and our ideas, because actually it's that collective endeavour that has driven civilization forward. And the key questions that we have, that we're asking ourselves and actively working on is, how does artificial intelligence help us augment our collective human intelligence? How does it help us advance that? And what are the risks that it poses to our collective intelligence? And I can start by offering a few provocations. But first of all, before I do, I just want to get a sense of the room. So maybe a show of hands. Who is feeling optimistic about the future of artificial intelligence? Okay, I would say that's maybe 50%. Who is feeling pessimistic and worried about the future of artificial intelligence? 80-20, thank you. Can always count on the economist to do the maths. I think I'm really on the fence on this, because I think there's huge potential, but I think we're on the wrong trajectory at the moment. If we care about creating thriving societies that really help us to make best use of our collective intelligence, I think we're going the wrong way about it. So, number one, I think it's really important to acknowledge that generative AI is not magic. It is the product of our collective human experience, of billions of contributions from millions of people, particularly from the English language internet. But I think we have to recognise that that is what it is. It is the product of a huge amount of human endeavour. And even now, our AI models are still reliant on the collective intelligence of groups of people who are fine-tuning those models, who are moderating their outputs, who are red teaming to test for vulnerabilities in those models. So I think we just have to remember that to start with. I think overall, though, we have to ask ourselves, what are we using AI for and why? And at the moment, we are, or not, I say we, the world and the big companies are trying to build AI that automates us rather than augments us as humans. And I think a a great example of this is if you look at the type of applications we're building, we are building applications that replace individual filmmakers, designers, copywriters. And there are definitely productivity gains to be made in the way that people interact with these applications. But I see a much bigger need that is not being addressed currently through AI innovation. And that's how we work together as groups of people. If you look at the big problems that we're facing today, everything from climate change to inequality, those require us to collaborate in new ways, to navigate really difficult trade-offs. And there is much less investment going into AI that actually helps us work together effectively in groups. There are some green shoots. So it's not all bad news, but you don't hear much about them. But there are really great examples. One example from the Philippines, where AI models are being used to support groups of community stakeholders to decide together how to manage scarce water resources. There are examples in Taiwan where an AI tool called Polis is being used to help understand where there is common consensus amongst the public on the policy choices that should be made on difficult legislative questions. There are examples in Africa where machine learning models are helping groups of smallholder farmers to communicate between each other, to share advice and idea on how to deal with some of the challenges that they're facing. But this is not where the investment is going in AI at the moment. And that is having a fundamental impact on inequality. So the current paradigm is that we need bigger models. And the impact of bigger models is you need more data. You need more compute power. And that means all of AI is currently being monopolized by a very small number of very large, very powerful companies. And we should be deeply concerned about it. It doesn't have to be like this. Bigger isn't always beautiful. Small can be beautiful. And sometimes small models can solve the jobs just as well as the big ones. I have many other views on things that we could be doing differently, but perhaps I'll give the floor back to Luís and Karim.
Thank you very much, Katie. Karim, the words Katie shared with us have clearly pointed out on the inequalities associated to the technological revolution. We already have a lot of inequalities in the world. Some of them created, or at least impelled by the most recent globalization trends. How do you see the evolution in the short term? Not in the long term. In the long term, we all be dead, as John Maynard Keynes.
Thank God.
Thank God.
There's good reasons for that, but we can. So first, let's me thank Fernando and his team. I think congratulations not for the event, but for creating a spirit. And I think it's a spirit that corresponds to what your country epitomizes. The possibility to have a reasonable dialogue in a not so reasonable context. So congratulations. And I think these are precious for us. These are precious structure that we need to cultivate, nurture, and they're all the more necessary in this context. Let me give you a view of the South, since I'm in Rabat, Moroccan, in Africa. Let me give you how we see the world through those glasses. Not mine, but I think this is taking place. You're asking, first of all, you're asking a very difficult question, and I have no answer. I asked the question to ChatGPT 4.0 before, and I'm not going to tell you what ChatGPT has to say. You can do it. He'll quote you the McKinsey report, he'll quote you the IMF paper, the Roderick Restrepo paper, etc., if you want to have an idea. I think it's all BBS. This is not going to happen as we expect, but anyway, it's there. It's but nobody knows basically what's the impact on inequality, on the job market, and I'll come back to that. So this is not taking place in a vacuum, and this is what we've been talking about for the past 1.5 days. This is taking in a context, and let me describe you a little bit the context I will see it in the New South. First of all, there's politics, and there are demands from citizens, from Portugal all the way to Britain, to Morocco, and to Africa in general. There are demands to be protected from states. The state is back everywhere. Since COVID, it was already there, and the state is back to protect, because that's what our populations want. The state is back to reassure, and it's not doing that very well all around the world because it is tough to reassure in this context. And the state is back also to organize AI. Unfortunately, we are seeing the emergence of a new state, a social state on one side, but a techno-security state, which is a little bit the emerging model around the world, or what for some will be a successful new state for this 21st century. So combining technology with politics, China is embarking this way, following the US, which is an old model that has been in place. And it is doing it quite successfully, and many countries are emulating that sort of model. So, we can productivity and positive impact of AI, of course, but this is, I think, redesigning as a generic technology, as electricity was. It's a generic technology that's going to affect all, sectors and portion of our societies. So that we have to keep in mind. This is a generic technology, I think, particularly for AI. This is generating, fears, and when human beings are, afraid, they act, irrationally or rationally, because this is a survival instinct in ours, and this is creating effects on the policies and the response. So it is good times for hawkish politics. It is a good time for, strong sort of, individuals and more working on sort of feelings rather than reason and rationality. So I think we all have the sense that it is a critical moment for many reasons, a critical juncture that will, a path that we will take and that will condition the next steps. So I think that we all share that, and this technology is happening within I don't know if it's a cause and consequence. Nobody knows why it is happening not now and not before, but it is happening in this context of wars, of disrespect for the world heritage, like the UN. I feel that United Nations, for us working in our spheres, is something that is in a way sacred. It's a world heritage that was built very difficultly with the price of blood of nation. Is something we need to protect, like the Club of Lisboa. It's something that we need to protect, and I think this is under danger, and this will have consequences. Okay, and that's part of the context where this is happening. This is not the only structural sort of change that is happening. Another one is climate, of course. And some of the responses to climate challenges are in technology, but we're not seeing this at scale, particularly, let's say, in Africa. We're not seeing this, irrigating most developing countries. The second one The second structural transformation is demographics. It's demographics, aging populations in advanced economies, particularly in Europe. Of course, again, technology could be a response, but it is also a challenge that generate fears, that generate sort of protection mechanisms, and the discussion in the previous panel on migration, etc. Demographics in the South, which is again an opportunity with the youthful population, but all this is not matching, globally yet. And let us see where we will be going. So that creates an environment where we feel we have the response, but we're not able to craft the responses. In the short run, it is enhancing this tendency of techno-security states that is also challenging democracies with this illiberal sort of model that is challenging democracies that are not delivering efficiently anymore to that population. For democracy to be legitimate, it has to be efficient, definitely. So that's why we're seeing this hawkish sort of politics all around the world. In terms of economics, I'm not going to bore you, but this is fragmentation, protectionism, industrial policies. Everybody, to summarize it for our friends here in the room, it's basically everybody thinks that is smarter than the other one. That's it. That's what it is, And so there's a sort of race to the bottom in a way that is creating a very tough environment, not uncooperative environment in terms of the reshaping of trade flows and global value chains, etc. So the growth model in this framework, including that story about technology and equality, is not clear anymore for developing countries. 10, 12 years ago, I would say, fix your macro, do some structural reforms, lower red tape, basically the Washington Consensus Plus, and this is your growth model. Today, it's not obvious what is the growth model. The growth model is you have China with this, what China is doing, and you have countries around China in Asia that are sort of benefiting of the kind of effect that Japan was producing when it emerged. But then for Africa, what is the growth model in a world where trade restrictions are increasing, where we have more sort of protectionist policies, subsidies in advanced economies, etc. So it is more difficult. I think it's making policies much more difficult, and governments are not equipped to manage this complexity and produce the policies that it requires, and the constant adjustment and capacity sort of to make them evolve to respond to the challenges. Most governments still work on a model that is, centuries old. Ministries, departments, stuff like that. They don't trust academia, more or less, a little bit. Some countries more, others. On average, there is little trust of those guys in theories, and we are sort of more in act. So there is an issue. Let me close on education. And let me say a word about the Foucault pendulum. I hope you have all read Umberto Eco's book, because this is a very nice image of where we are. We're all searching for a fixed point in a chaotic world, and we need that as human beings. This is why we need strong governments, but smart governments. We need a fixed point in a chaotic environment. We're always searching for comfort, but when we're too comfortable, then we don't do much, and then this is not optimal. So it is a permanent tension between being sort of challenged and competition, and then being in a comfort zone. So let me close on education, as I'm also involved at a university, and what it means for our students. I think even if we don't know much about the jobs of the future, we know one thing, is the best minds, I think, are the ones that can combine intuition and reason and rationality. So this is what we should teach our students. Rationality is what you do, engineering, models, quantitative stuff, science, etc., but also intuitions. Intuitions are sometimes more reasonable than the outcomes of rationality, scientific rationality. So this is, I think, what we try to do at the university where I am, the Mohammed VI Polytechnic University, where we have almost half of our students are engaged in non-degrees education. And they get a job. It's 3,000. We have about 7,000 students. 3,000 students are engaged in it's called 1337. It's a coding school where there is no degree, there's no professors. Don't know if you know this model. No degree, no professor. They all find a job before finishing, steps. They're kind of steps. So they get token to help each other, etc. They find a job immediately, no degrees. Okay? So we don't really know why, and we know that 70% of our degree students are women. And 95% of the kids in this school are boys. So there are also profound transformation in the way the labor market is functioning, the type of relation you have with your employer, with contracts and stuff, versus independent work, versus nomad kind of activity, consultant type of relations, etc. So this is happening as we speak. It has to do with technology, of course, again. It's a good thing, it's a bad thing, I don't know. Let us see the kind of protection, the kind of inequality it's going to produce or not. But this is happening as we speak. And so I would say, let's be careful how we reorient our educational system, because these are choices that engage us for decades in the future. But what I can know from where I sit and talking to colleagues is really this balance between intuition and reason in the capacity of thinking that is essential for citizens. After all, technology or not, we're individual, and we are individual as such, in societies, not necessarily with the technology that goes with it. So that will be the end of what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karim. It's a very powerful remarks. Moving to Portuguese. A imagem do pêndulo de Foucault é uma excelente imagem. I was saying that your reference to Foucault's pêndulo é uma excelente imagem, e o problema é que nós sociedades, já tivemos mais acima no pêndulo. Nós agora estamos na bola, que é precisamente o sítio que abana mais.
It's never at the right place. That's how it is.
Uma reflexão sobre aquilo que quer a Katie, quer o Karim disseram, e depois uma questão que dirijo à Catarina, mas que também pode ser respondida pelos demais. A reflexão... eu ouvi as declarações quarta-feira, acho que foi quarta ou terça-feira, de um dos dois galardoados com o Prémio Nobel da Física, o mais novo. Há um que tem 91, outro tem 70, 80, e portanto era o que tinha 80. Um jovem como eu, pouco mais velho do que eu. E ele contrariava um pouco o que a Katie disse, porque ele disse, não, a inteligência artificial generativa, como a conhecemos hoje, ainda se limita a utilizar o conhecimento que nós humanos, fomos desenvolvendo. Mas em 3, 4 anos isso acabou. Nós já não vamos sequer perceber o que é que a máquina está a fazer. Portanto, não é no próximo século, não é nos anos 5, não é na segunda metade do século XXI. É agora, em 2030. E não vou sequer falar dos desafios que isso coloca. Uma observação sobre aquilo que o Karim partilhou connosco, e que tem a ver com as estruturas do poder. Eu acho que esse é um ponto muito forte. É muito forte no presente, mas é forte no presente já dos últimos 30, 40 anos. A estrutura do poder... Os governos, os parlamentos, os os departamentos, as direções gerais, continuam a funcionar basicamente da mesma forma que funcionavam há 40, 50 anos. Ok, agora há mais WhatsApps, trocam-se WhatsApps entre os ministérios, mas o modelo do processo de decisão é arcaico. E um poder que é... Isso vale para Portugal, para Espanha, para França, para Itália, para Marrocos, para a Malásia, para qualquer país. O modelo é substancialmente idêntico. Alguns são tecnologicamente mais avançados, os bálticos são um bocadinho mais avançados, mas o modelo, a estrutura é basicamente a mesma. Como é que um sistema de poder organizado de uma forma, digamos, eu não diria pré-histórica, mas pré-revolução tecnológica, pode responder aos desafios atuais? Isso leva-me a mudar para a questão que queria colocar à Catarina, que eu acho que é o grande desafio, mas é um desafio, eu diria, individual. Individual a cada um de nós, mas à sociedade no seu todo. Que é como é que a Catarina, enquanto profissional do ofício, enquanto alguém que está a trabalhar em modelos de inteligência artificial no setor da saúde, como é que vê a possibilidade de nós, as pessoas, aceitarem não ter um interface humano no seu tratamento? Que é a mesma questão que se coloca, já foi hoje anunciado o lançamento do primeiro serviço de táxi sem qualquer intervenção humana. Então, um serviço de táxi, o táxi vai buscar a pessoa à casa, não está lá ninguém dentro, a pessoa desce, entra no táxi, o táxi arranca, está programado para levar a determinado sítio. E esse é um desafio que na cabeça das pessoas é muito complicado. Até do ponto de vista da... quando se faz... Há um estudo muito interessante, que é facilmente acessível, há um estudo muito interessante que identifica quais são as duas profissões mais renitentes, digamos assim, à inteligência artificial. Médico cirurgião e piloto de avião. Quer dizer, ninguém se vai meter num avião sem estar lá, pelo menos alguém. A máquina até podia fazer o trabalho melhor sozinha, mas a pessoa não se vai enfiar num avião sem ter alguém ao volante. E ninguém se vai enfiar, embora isso já exista, numa mesa de operações sem que exista um médico lá dentro. Embora no IPO em Portugal fazem-se todos os dias intervenções cirúrgicas sem nenhum médico dentro da sala, porque o robô faz o trabalho todo. Não é? Mas pronto, nessa altura o paciente já está anestesiado, nem dá por ela, não é?
É uma questão bastante interessante e, na verdade, penso que foi no início deste ano. Saiu um estudo em que, basicamente, se testou pôr-se pacientes a serem atendidos por um médico versus serem atendidos por um equivalente a um chat GPT médico. E aquilo que as pessoas reconheciam no chat GPT, mas também porque ele foi treinado para tal, e isto é importante referir, que ele foi treinado, foi refinado para tal, era uma maior empatia. Portanto, que é uma coisa que os seres humanos procuram quando nós procuramos o contacto. Quando nós vamos a um médico, se temos um problema grave, procuramos empatia do outro lado. Neste momento sabemos que, por exemplo, o SNS português está com problemas muito sérios de listas de espera de muitos doentes para serem atendidos. Portanto, as pessoas vão em fila, portanto, são atendidas num curto período. A parte da empatia as pessoas não a sentem. Não é que ela não exista, por simplesmente não há tempo para tudo. É uma realidade. Que é o que o chat GPT aparentemente tem aos milhões, porque enquanto a pessoa vai falando com ele vai falando de volta. Portanto, há uma componente aqui. Portanto, há de haver uma faixa da população que invariavelmente vai preferir ferramentas com tempo, penso eu. Se isto é bom, já é outra questão. Ou seja, há aqui a componente humano que não é um humano, é um humano digital, mas todo o discurso é humano. Portanto, cria uma proximidade.
Vai aumentar as desigualdades.
Vai aumentar as desigualdades invariavelmente, porque pensando em desigualdades económicas, não vamos ter todos acesso às mesmas ferramentas para entrar em contacto com estas ferramentas. Isto é verdade. Pessoas com idades mais avançadas, há de haver uma altura em que começa a haver uma reticência e uma dificuldade em interagir com a tecnologia, mesmo que tenham interagido a vida toda. Isso vai ser desigualdade não só económica, mas desigualdade demográfica em termos de idade. A distribuição destas ferramentas, para já, não é universal, mas há uma questão interessante nesta história dos robôs cirúrgicos. É que permitem operar uma pessoa a uma distância enorme. E ainda há pouco tempo também saiu isso nas notícias, de uma operação que foi feita, o cirurgião estava num país, o paciente noutro. Portanto, isto cria oportunidades, pensando, por exemplo, em África, em que a população médica é muito menor, em determinados países há muito menos especialistas. Fazer chegar a saúde a estas populações vai aumentar a igualdade em termos de acesso aos cuidados de saúde. O problema é fazer lá chegar estas ferramentas, fazer lá chegar estes recursos, que neste momento continuam a ser caros economicamente. Portanto, isto está sempre aqui duas facetas da moeda, infelizmente. Esta questão dos cirurgiões também é interessante porque, de facto, a verdade é que mesmo nós que trabalhamos na inteligência artificial, e o segundo vencedor do Prémio Nobel da Física, o Geoffrey Hinton, que tem 92 anos, nos últimos anos ele estava na Google, despediu-se da Google e tem sido um grande defensor de que é preciso ter cuidado com a inteligência artificial, de que é preciso regulamentar, pensar naquilo que se faz, nomeadamente com a inteligência artificial generativa que a Katy referiu, que sim, tira partido daquilo que nós geramos, daquilo que nós produzimos, e às vezes certas populações ainda tiram partido disso para falsificar, para criar informação falsa, para prejudicar. Portanto, há aqui um ponto bastante interessante, que é as próprias pessoas que trabalham em AI, algumas delas alertam para o problema e receberam um prémio Nobel pelas contribuições que fizeram. Portanto, isto...
Obrigado. Katy, quer... Yeah.
Thank you. I think we're really at the frontiers of understanding to what extent we as humans will accept the full automation of certain tasks and interactions with things like public services. I think we just don't know where the limit is right now. In some of our work, I've actually been quite surprised by people's willingness to have certain things automated. For example, we were working with the Red Cross in Nepal, helping them to build an AI tool that would predict which types of aid items different types of households in different regions of Nepal would need after a crisis. We thought there would be quite a lot of resistance from community members affected by crises to this idea. But actually what we heard was they think the current way that aid is allocated doesn't work, and it's biased, and it goes to people who are friends or family members of the people who have the power to distribute aid. So in that situation, they were happy for a tool that they perceived to be potentially less biased to take over some of the decision making, which I think so for me, it really comes down to, I think, a combination of a number of things. Number one, what is that specific AI use case? What's the specific application doing? What context is it operating in? And what's the organization who's using it? Is that organization trustworthy? So I think these are the three things we need to take into account when we're thinking about, is this actually an appropriate, safe, trustworthy, and socially acceptable use of AI in a particular context? And I think one of the things that I find a little bit frustrating about the whole AI debate is that there's a general sense of this is happening to us. It's happening to us and we can't do anything about it. That's not the case. We absolutely can decide how we use AI, where we should, where we shouldn't. And I think one of the key things we really need to do is to have a much stronger role for the public in the governance of AI, particularly within the public sector and public services. And this is one of the big things that we've been pushing the UK government for and starting to talk to other governments for, because social acceptance and social license to operate is absolutely key for the adoption of AI. But that social acceptance line will change over time because social norms change over time. And really being able to engage the public to understand, do you want this done to you? Do you want this done for you by an AI in this way? I think is really critical, and it's something that we are not currently doing. So all of the AI assurance that's happening at the moment is about trying to mitigate risk through mathematical approaches. And maybe this is my humanities background coming out, but I think risk is fundamentally a social issue, a social concern, and we need social processes for understanding what risk is acceptable and what isn't. There was one other point I wanted to make. Maybe I shouldn't try and argue with a Nobel Prize winner. This seems probably foolhardy. But thankfully, they're not here. One of the concerns, and Catarina, you probably know more about this than me, is that we're at the point now where we're actually running out of data to train models because we've scooped up all of the data from most of the English language internet right now. So there's actually a limit. What AI companies are now doing is creating synthetic data, so fake data that's generated by machines to train these new models. What we're also seeing is the continual scraping of websites, but increasingly, a lot of the content on the internet has been created by generative AI. And I think there was a prediction that I read recently that 90% of the internet will be AI-generated content by 2025. I don't know if that's true or not, but we are potentially reaching a point where we will have models trained on content that has not been created by humans, but that has been created by other computer models. And there's a risk that we will have collapse.
I think it is already the case. It's not in 5 years. It's
yeah.
I was just going to add that that's why ChatGPT 5, they have been delaying the release because there are no more data and they just are training the model with its own generated data and they are seeing the model collapsing. So it's a problem because the model generated synthetic fake data and collapsing on it, it's concerning because we'll be informing people of things that are not true. Yeah.
Well, that's not new.
No, it is.
That's not new. That's what we are doing from long time. I think we are 10 minutes from the 5 minutes.
We are in time, but I will give you 5 minutes.
No. If you are in time, it's time for break.
Karim wants to say something quickly.
Or slowly, as you prefer.
Of fairness.
As you prefer.
Fairness is important, that's, you know. But a couple of remarks. At the same time, we're not very efficient. So that's the project you mentioned, you know, farmers, etc. The queues at health systems, we could be much better. There could be a pre-diagnosis that you could do yourself, and then if it's urgent, organize the queue. So we're not very efficient as human beings.
The Danish are doing so.
Yes, I think this is a good use, and there are many examples. But at the same time, if you take agriculture, where technology is fundamental, the technology is not flowing in Africa, for instance. You have, you know, but I'm talking at scale, massively. It's not flowing, it's not working. We need a model. It doesn't work. So you talk about inequality. Here is one example. The farmers in many, you know, areas of the world are using, you know, remote sensing technology, soil testing, you know, advanced stuff. It's not happening. And I think there are many examples like that where we could organize. And we've seen in Africa, for instance, in fintech, many countries have leapfrogged the stage of the banking sector to access financial services. It has happened in mobile technology, you know, rather than focusing fixed line all around the country, costing billions, subsidized by the government, use mobile phone. It's a leapfrog. It happened. So let's not throw the baby with the water. it has some benefits, and I think we need to extract a lot from that. Technology in general, it doesn't have to be AI, etc. There's a lot we can do here. Another dimension is maybe, and that's a question for you and for all of you, I think this is increasing maybe the average level of cognition in society, okay? I use ChatGPT as a personal assistant, you know. It increased my cognitive, you know, it's a sort of, I have a professor with me all the time, you know, and it has smart responses, really, on many topics. I can tell you, I copied and pasted your questions, Fernando, here. I invite you to do that. I copy the small text you have in the program. I showed this to Hun. It's impressive. Then I told him, use scientific resources, you know, use more data, give me references, etc., etc. 5-10 minutes, he gave me a paper. I could sell it to you, you know, to publish. It's nice. Yeah.
I did the same.
Fantastic. We all love to procrastinate. You know, we're all lazy. Let's, you know, so, you know, like meetings, you know, now this, you know, transcript, ChatGPT, give me a summary. Who cares anyway? Nobody reads summaries of meetings. So who cares? Before there was a guy doing the summary, at least he knew what happened in the meeting. Now it's being made, you know, through, I'm joking, but half joking, because this is also the kind, you know, we're good at adjusting human beings. And so anyway, regulation and governance of the whole thing.
That's the issue.
I think the companies should be made responsible and should be in the governance. They should be part, they should have skin in the game, they should be in the bodies, they should put political responsibilities on them. And this could be at the global level, you know, I don't know which kind of institution, but I think the companies, ChatGPT, AI, etc., all those guys, they should be in a sort of governance framework where governments are there and where they are. And they should be responsible in front of societies of the misuse, and there should be transparency, etc., etc. It's so important. It's so political. It has so much impact on politics, on elections, etc., etc., on cyber, on the security of citizens, of societies, etc. We've seen this summer what happened with the huge attacks on countries during the Olympic Games in France, etc. Not everything has been said, but they've said a lot, and lots had happened. So I think this has to be, you know, a governance open, transparent, where they can be made accountable. There could be a tax to finance the regulation, which is going to be costly, enormously costly. There should be a sort of global tax on that, and there will be support, I think, you know, among population. This group of companies and, you know, the scientists also, they're responsible. When you talk to them, they have, you know, fairness, morale in general. So I don't see why there should be sort of, you know, we should, like enemies or whatever. They're part of society, so we should take them at their own game, in fact, and come. And this is the governments, you know it better than everybody else. You should be responsible. You should be transparency. So I think that's the way we should deal with this, and it can't be done at a national level, even at a continental level. This is a worldwide issue because this is flowing everywhere. So that's what I would say on governance.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Boa tarde, bem-vindos de volta. Welcome back to all the participants. I guess that Branko Milanovic is already... Yes, I am seeing you. Thank you very much for your presence and your participation. I'm a huge fan of your works and your articles and papers. I have with me, I will speak a little bit. This is a very interesting book which was published by the Economic and Social Council of Portugal on the geopolitical change and the impact in the Portuguese economy. You are the most cited scholar in the book. So the floor is yours, and please go on.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I really appreciate it. I would have preferred to be in Lisbon, where I've been many times, and I have extremely nice memories, including, I just remember now, since you mentioned that you like some of my writings, including a small Substack that I wrote on Fernando Pessoa, who actually was very impressed one of the times when I was in Lisbon. So thanks again. I would speak as the moderator had told me for 15 minutes, so I would have to go relatively fast, but I'm sure there will be other presenters who would cover similar grounds, and also there will be Q&A. I would actually focus on a very empirical part of what happened in the last 30 years at, in what sense globalization has changed the world, and in how, the world has really changed in the last 30 years. Let me start with this very general graph, which goes 2 centuries back. It goes back to the 1820s, the end of Napoleonic Wars, and it charts on the very vertical axis. It shows the estimated level of inequality between all individuals in the world. Don't ask me now about technicalities, how this is calculated. It's a complex story, but I think even for the 19th century, we have broad picture of what happened. And for the end of the 20th and the beginning of the 21st century, these are the red dots, and they are actually based on household surveys from about 90 to 95% of the world. So obviously they are much more precise than the historical data. But what you notice there is after the Napoleonic Wars and with Industrial Revolution and colonialism, you have had a very significant increase in inequality between individuals in the world, simply because some countries, particularly Western and Northwestern Europe, North America and Japan, became rich, whereas India and China stagnated or went down. So without going into the details about the past, which actually is quite interesting in its own right, let us focus now on the red dots, which means basically the last 40 years. What you notice there is a significant, even dramatic decline in global inequality. I know that it comes very often as a surprise because we live in the world of inequalities, rising inequalities. But these rising inequalities are inequalities at the nation-state level in most cases. Actually, many countries like the US, even Portugal, US, China, obviously, Russia, UK, they all have had, India, very significant increases in inequality. But at the global level, what really matters even more is what happens to poor countries. And what happened is that China, that used to be a poor country, and to a lesser extent India and Indonesia, have had a period of extremely high growth. So China alone practically has driven these red dots down. In other words, has reduced global inequality. And that's a very important point to have in mind, is that we live in the world of increasing within national inequalities and the decline of global inequality between citizens, essentially driven by China and, as I said later, by India, Vietnam, and so forth. These countries, as you know, have been poor, but they have, of course, become, particularly China now, upper middle income countries, not only in terms of income, but obviously technological development and all other things. This is the same type of a graph, and now I'm using the thick blue line is based on GDP numbers rather than household survey numbers, and there too you see the significant decline in inequality. But I want to point out one seemingly small detail, which of course maybe we will discuss later, is that at the very end of this period, which is practically now, from approximately 2018, 2019, we do not see any further decline in global inequality. And there are several reasons for that, and I will just mention them now. First, China is no longer the engine for that, simply because the country has become too rich to be an engine for reduction of global inequality. it could be that now China is even contributing to global inequality by its fast growth. Secondly, we have now the emerging problem, which has always been a problem, of Africa not catching up or not converging, and on the other hand, becoming more important in calculations like that because of the fact that it's the only continent with a rising population. So these 2 points that I just mentioned are something that maybe we should discuss later when we look at really how the evolution of global inequality and then geopolitics as well will follow. Now, the global income distribution, as you can see, the green line, which is 2018, is very different from the way it was in 1988. Now, this graph shows you the distribution with levels of income in logarithmic form on a horizontal axis. The reason why it is in logarithmic form is that actually the gaps in income are so large that if you were to not draw it in logarithmic form, you would really have a graph that would have to extend very, very far, and then actually it would be very difficult to see what is happening. But here you see that actually there is something which looks like log normal distribution for the world, which is a novelty, because as you can see for 1988 and even 2008, you had many more people on the left side, meaning relatively poor. Now you have much thicker middle of the global income distribution. I'm reluctant to speak of the global middle class because these people are not rich by Western standards. They have incomes, as you can see on this graph, they have annual incomes of $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, which is not considered really, it's kind of almost poverty line by the Western standards, but it is a large improvement compared to 30 years ago. So you do have really much more of people in the middle. Now, what has happened is actually many of you know, and I will say very briefly, is actually in the first period of globalization, you had something that used to be called the elephant chart, which shows you that the main gainers of globalization at that time were people in the middle, which means basically China. Then also the middle at the global top 1%. These are people who actually, you see at the number 100, which is top 1%, and you see very high income growth for them. The vertical axis shows the income growth over that period annualized. And then the losers of globalization were essentially lower middle classes or middle classes of Western countries. They are richer than the Chinese, but they didn't grow. That's the bottom line. That has really changed to some extent in the next period, where you actually see that the next period after the financial crisis really never went back to the situation where the top 1% had as significant income gains as in the past. So we are now really in a different situation, at least up to the COVID crisis. After that, the data really, we don't have the data of sufficient number of people and quality to be able to say what happened afterwards precisely. But here you see that actually China and Asia continued growth. That's actually the middle of the income distribution. And the lower middle classes of the rich world did not improve. But who changed was really the global top 1% that is now actually, again, up to the COVID, has not grown the way that they had grown during the high globalization. So let me then finish with the China effect. That's actually the main story that I'm now giving in an extremely abbreviated version. And just to realize how much the world has changed, I've plotted here, these are the shares, total income of different countries in the world. Now, these are different scales. Let's start with US and China. That's actually the most interesting. China is in the blue, US is in the red. And when the data start in the mid-50s, US is producing, as you see it on the very top, 40% of global GDP. Currently, US is producing under 20% of global GDP in purchasing power parity terms, and it has been overtaken by China in 2015 as the largest economy in the world. That's kind of reasonably well known. But compare India and the UK. That's actually quite striking. By 1980, India and the UK had a total GDP which were about the same. Currently, India has a GDP which is 4 times larger than the UK. And we are talking about only 40 years. So this is a relatively short period of time in history. The same story is really true with Indonesia and the Netherlands. As you can see, I intentionally used the countries that were colonized by individual European nations. And Vietnam has still not overtaken France, but you noticed actually all European and Western countries have really a fairly significant decline in their total share of world output. France went down from 5% to 2.5% in the 60 years. So this is really this movement towards the center of gravity of the world economy being now in the Pacific and especially in Asia. And my last slide, at the level of individuals, the China effect is also, that's the interesting part, is also quite noticeable, and that's really the part that I would like to end with. What these graphs show are, let's start with left graph, which is China. So this is Chinese urban deciles who are then put, they go from the 1, which is the poorest decile, to number 10, which is the richest decile. So they are put in the global income distribution. The first year is 1988. The second year is 2018. Now, you notice there was a significant shift on all the deciles upward, meaning that these deciles are now in global income distribution at higher position than they used to be 30 years ago. This is something that, of course, everybody expects. You know, China has grown tremendously. So the urban deciles, for example, the top decile, which was at the 67th percentile in the world, is now at the 94th. So there is no sort of surprise there. Everybody knows it. But what is interesting is when you look at what happened when China goes up, since this is the ranking, this is the ordinal distribution, somebody has to go down. And for example, I took Italy as a really prime example of that. Look what happened to the Italian bottom of the distribution, the 40% of the bottom of the Italian distribution. Since they didn't grow, or they grew minimally compared to the rest of the world, and since they are in the range of China and other Asian growth, they all went down. So the red line shows you, for example, that the bottom Italian decile went down from the 70th percentile in the world to the 55th percentile in the world. Like dramatic ordinal decline. That does not mean that these guys became poorer. That it simply means that they were within the range of the effect where large numbers of Chinese and later Indians and Indonesians and others are moving into those distributions. And that's actually very common, actually, for all countries, including the US, Germany, and position of the lower deciles or the lower part of rich countries' distributions. So that, of course, has very significant geopolitical impact. So let me just state that when we look at the effect of Asian rise, and in particular China's rise, we have to distinguish 2 different effects. The first one is the effect at the level of country or nation state. China has become much larger. It's a country with the largest economy, and that has produced, and this is a political issue, but it has produced, I think, the fear of globalization under the previous conditions within the United States. So all the most recent measures which are really going against globalization that we have seen are the result of a geopolitical fear within the United States of China's rise. But at the personal level, individual level, what China has produced is re-ranking in global income positions of individuals. And for the first time in last 2 centuries, Westerners, which means basically Europeans, North American, and Japanese, are not alone in the top 20% of the global income distribution. So that's really a remarkable change that you have now many people, more people from Asia entering this top group of 10% or 20%. You still don't have that many people in the top 1%, but it is only a matter of time. So we have really a major reshuffling of global income positions between individuals. And therefore, you see the effect of the geopolitical change of the position of Asia being reflected at each individual's level or individual position in global income distribution. So I think it is important to keep these two, how should I say, China effects separate and to realize they're enormous. Actually, I think this is sort of a historical importance of what we are witnessing today. So I will stop here. I hope I stayed within 15 minutes. It was really a little bit accelerated, including in the way that I spoke, but I hope I got my main message across.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting speech or comments. I'm a little bit stroken by your words. I wonder if I have to tell my children, please consider to move to Asia ASAP. But I also...
Maybe not a bad idea.
No, I also have some questions, but I will now give the floor. Maybe I will begin with Karim. Karim, do you have any question, comment?
Yes, very quickly, thank you. Sorry? Yeah, Branko, I rented his mother's apartment in Calorama Street long time ago when I was at the World Bank. So we met, but he doesn't remember.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
This is quite,
96.
quite an unexpected connection.
1996. You were still at
Yes, I do remember, of course. Yes.
You were at the bank at that time. No,
Absolutely. Yes.
I just wanted to have your gut feeling on do you think this will continue? That's of course achievements. The data stops in 2018. Much has happened in China since then in terms of policy. So, do you think these dynamics, I mean, at the global level of reshuffling of income distribution, will continue? And second, what would be your advice in terms of policies for those who are in a way challenged by these the losers basically of these dynamics?
Okay, I would be, well, first of all, very nice, actually, really regret that I'm not in Lisbon, because I would love to meet you, since we do share things from 1996, which was, of course, a long time ago. Let me say the following. First, I do have some preliminary data on up to 2022. And of course, we have GDP numbers also, which go together with surveys. China has continued to outperform the US. So the main question is actually, if you look at the US and China, how large is the gap in growth rates to continue? In the last period, after like the first decade or first 15 years of the 21st century, China gap was like 7-8% over the US, 6, 7, and 8%. That was large. I don't think it will continue. But the positive gap in favor of China, I think, will continue. So the processes will continue as well. And when it comes, but of course, at a slower rate. But when it comes to global inequality, the role of India and Africa becomes crucial. So if African countries really cannot converge, and they have not really shown any inclination of convergence in the last 60 years, we might actually have further now. The decline of global inequality might stop, and we might go for an increase in global inequality. But the second question was about the policies. Here, I have to say that I'm very pessimistic. I think that the US has decided that it doesn't like this globalization. I think the measures that they have, these are very consistent measures since 2016. They're really anti-globalization measures. And that means that they had essentially a choice, which I think is illustrated. Let me just go into this particular slide. if you have this slide, and the US middle class is here at the bottom, really with very little growth, you have two possibilities. You either go against China and change globalization, which they have, obviously, US seems to have decided to do that, or you go for a policy of redistribution at the national level, where you try to actually take as much money as possible from the top 1%. They have not done that, and maybe it was very difficult politically, and for security reasons and others, they have decided, the US has decided to go, to change globalization. So that decision, I think, is irrevocable. It seems to me it has been followed very consistently for the last 6 years with increased tariff rates, creation of trade blocs, economic coercion, much tighter migration policies. And to some extent, it has been followed by Europe. So we are now entering a different type of globalization where all these geopolitical elements are much more difficult to predict.
Thank you. I will now give the floor to Catarina. Catarina is a PhD researcher on IA and robotics. She's very involved on IA currently.
Hi, Branko. Thank you for the nice presentation. Actually, so this is definitely not my field of expertise, as you can imagine. But so the evolution of China has been pretty quick, right? So what was the game changer in your perspective? Was it a matter of technology aligned with globalization? Was it a matter of opening the borders, sending the students away? What was the game changer that caused this evolution? And it's a little bit the same for India, I think.
Yes. Yes, actually, it's good that you mentioned India because, of course, when I tell this story in a relatively quick way, I focus on the most important game changer, as you said, and that's indeed China. But India is also a game changer, and there was a significant increase in the rate of growth of India, as you know, in the last 30 years. It was not as constant, as sustained as China, nor as high, but it is a country that is now the largest country in the world, and then it doesn't really have a similar role to China. Now, when you ask me about China, of course, that's the topic that is being studied, and different people have different views. But the fact is that when China opened up in 1978, and that opening was only possible because China has regulated its relationship with the United States. People forget, and sometimes they even write articles, which in my opinion make no sense, talking about Maoist China having a strategy of export-driven growth. But they couldn't have export-driven growth when the US had embargo on China and didn't have diplomatic relations, because you needed American market and you needed American technology. And in that sense, China has followed what Japan and later South because it is a larger country, and has been, of course, successful, as we know, to jump to the surprise of many over technological generations very quickly. So what were the causes? As you know, we can just, there are many different views, but certainly globalization and opening of China played extremely important role. The Chinese background of very high education and fairly equal gender relations play a role. People forget about that, but under Maoist times, many of the impediments to growth, which were due to high share of large landowners or discrimination of women or insufficient education, they were actually solved, as it were. And they were then able to drive China into a very high rate of growth. Finally, China did not make a mistake that many developing countries, including those in Eastern Europe, made, which was to borrow. And China relied much more on foreign investments and then ability to take the technology from these foreign investors and to apply it in China. So this would be sort of more general my view about Chinese economic success. But you know, Chinese lessons are not very easy to replicate in the other parts of the world. So that's the problem. As you know, China has tried to do that in Africa. Ethiopia has followed that with some success, but then Ethiopia has political issues now. So the Chinese lessons are very specific lessons, and I'm a little bit skeptical about their applicability to the rest of the world.
Okay, thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Katie. Katie is the director of Center for Collective Intelligence Design. Please.
Hi, Branko. Thanks very much for your presentation. Before you joined, we were talking a lot about AI and the impact of technology. And at the moment, obviously, the AI race is primarily between China and the US. There's lots been written, talked about in terms of the potential impact of AI on inequality. And I wondered if you could say a bit about your thoughts on AI as a driver for inequality and what you think that might mean for the trend data over the course of the next 20, 40 years.
Well, this is an excellent question. I would be rather brief on that because, quite honestly, we are all groping. At least I'm groping. I really don't know what that effect would be. At times, I think that we might exaggerate that effect because AI is a technological change, an important technological change, but it's not the first technological change that we have faced. I was recently writing about history, economic thought in terms of inequality. And, Ricardo, when he wrote in 1817, the principles of political economy, was faced with a similar problem, the role of machinery and replacement of labor. So AI is to some extent similar. It replaces labor. There will be different, maybe, skill levels that it would replace. But my broad view on inequality is the following, and it's not particularly original. I think that it might increase the share of capital in national output. In other words, more of the national output would belong to the owners of capital and less, proportionally, less to labor. Now, if that happens, since capital income is heavily concentrated and capital income is concentrated amongst the rich, it would push for inequality within nations to go up. So that is my sort of prior, that it would make inequality of market income, which means before redistribution, would make it worse or more unequal. But it's not a very original position, and it does not tell us much about the issue that you raised, and that's the issue of it's essentially competition between the US and China, which then, of course, goes into the competition not only in economy, it can go into competition into the military area and so forth, but these are obviously the areas that I don't know. But the bottom line, it seems to me that the level of the nation state, it might push towards the increase of inequality of market incomes.
Thank you very much. Acho que agora é o momento de passar a palavra à plateia e convidar quem pretender. Okay, so I'll do it in English. I was passing the floor to the room and asking for the audience, but you may ask questions in Portuguese or no,
yes.
Only English. Oh, of course. But
Portuguese is okay too, yeah.
Okay, well, but not only questions directed to Branko Milanovic, also questions for the other members of the panel. So this is the wrap-up moment of the session.
Luís, se alguém só puder falar em português, faz o favor de resumir.
Yes. Who is the first? Oh, please, you were the first to raise the hand.
Thank you very much. I have one question for Mr. Milanovic. Hum Tran from Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. One question for Mr. Milanovic and one question for the panel here. So I think that the ranking of economies by purchasing power parity is misleading, because PPP is desired to measure the purchasing power of individuals in their own country. For example, if the haircut price is very cheap in a country, the PPP-based income of that country is high. But it has nothing to do when you compare the size, the influence of that economy with another economy where the price of haircut is higher. So to rank different countries by PPP, I think is very misleading, because countries deal with each other through import, export, investment in market prices, not PPP. So number one, that's the comment. The question is for the panel. We talk about AI, machine learning, huge data, and the data of the internet is being exhausted, and so on and so forth. Great. Machine will create its own data. Machine will derive correlation patterns among the new data and come up with even new data. What about values? Do you think that machine also will create its own values going forward, which are different and alien to human values?
Thank you. I think we should have some 2 or 3 more questions and then reply. There is one on the left side, à esquerda ali, já estão a descer, e depois primeiro ali aquela senhora, depois este senhor.
Hello. I would like to make a question to Mr. Branko. I was listening to you. Why do you think it's so difficult to get our decision makers, especially in Europe and the United States, to get to your conclusions and to make decisions that have that reality that you presented us as a worry and a need to act? And this also can be a question for the panel.
Muito obrigado.
Hello, Branko. My name is Fernando Ayala. I'm from Chile, former diplomat. I would like to ask you how, according to PPP, how stands Latin America in your view? Thank you.
Okay, I think there is no further questions at this point in time. So maybe I propose Branko to reply,
but
and
let
then
panel reply first, because I've spoken a lot. So
okay.
let's be more equitable.
These are values.
Who wants to be the first? Karim?
So thank you. On the policy makers, why they're not deciding on the face of facts, well, this is how policy makers function in general. It's not that efficient. It's difficult to combine science and decision making. It is anyone that has been in decision making position knows that very important decisions are taken in a sort of artistic manners, not all the time, but there's the constraints of politics. And these are general trends. They're not, they don't put pressure, but once pressure comes from the middle class in those countries, and we're seeing it, I mean, that's what you're seeing in the US election, basically. When people feel it in their skin, it has an implication in the politics. So I think it's gonna take time for this to trickle through decision-making process. It's a broader question of the place of Europe with the discussion we had before in terms of the demographics, the place in the world, the feeling of being under siege, etc., etc. So I think the dynamics on inequality that Branko has described are part of that sort of reshuffling of the status of nations. So sense of urgency is there, but the response is what you're seeing in elections. Far right, rising everywhere. So it's a sort of hardening of politics, which is not necessarily the right response, but this is the one we're getting because people are afraid. So then when you're afraid, you just close yourself. So I think it has to do with that on values, trust, and politics. I think this is a fundamentally political question. We will do with AI what we want to do as human beings. So the smaller common denominator will decide maybe the outcome and how it will drive society and its role in politics in particular. It's already happening today with chatbots, propaganda, influence, campaign on the cyber space to influence elections. I mean, you've been following, and it's not new. But in the end, the governance of it, how its role in society would be, it's fundamentally a political decision. And of course, values are what we, glue us together as nations, as the international community. So I don't think we should push this too far. I'm confident that we will be able, as a global community, to handle this. Those who are using it for malicious purposes today can also create the labyrinths of their own dismal. So, it's I think in difficult times and uncertain times, we need to be modest. And I think policies need to be as well modest, grounded on facts, patient, and wise. And I think these are values I think we do share.
AI values are those we tell him to put in practice, with the difference. Many times the values which are referred to by people are only a matter of speech, not a matter of practice. And with AI, probably if the machine is told that your values are these and these, the machine will act accordingly. Catarina.
Yeah, so outside, I was having an interesting talk about this concept of AI and this general idea that these things that we are creating or that the companies are creating are actually intelligent. But they are not. They are mathematics. So that's the thing. So on the other day, one of my master's students, I kind of forced him to read a book about machine learning. And he came to me and he was like, so professor, is this all just matrices and vectors and numbers? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, so this was a course that I did on my first year at IST. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, so this is not magic. Yeah, it's not magic. It's mathematics. The thing is that by creating very big models, we are allowing mathematics to learn statistics from data. And then we manipulate these statistics to generate new things that are not new. They are combinations of things that the models saw. Values are human things. So, and to be honest, last year I did a work about incorporating human values on AI. These are very personal. So it's something that changes from person to person, and it's not always easy to capture. So how can a machine that learns statistics capture a value or even create a new one? So I don't believe that this discussion will be a discussion until we actually create something that is intelligent and is able to think for itself and not by combining information from humans, a lot of them.
As you mentioned, the machine already showed more empathy than a lot of humans. This is the kind of values you can learn the machine.
Because you told the machine
but
to be like that.
I'm giving the floor to Katie. I don't want to monopolize.
I really agree with a lot of what, Catarina, you just said. I think machines do not inherently have values, but they have the values that they are programmed to have by whoever is programming them. And one of the major problems we have with AI at the moment is who is programming AI systems. They are predominantly a group of mostly white, Western, wealthy men. And of course, that particular group of people may have a certain set of values that are not broadly shared by a wider population or people who live and come from different cultures or different perspectives. There are efforts happening at the moment to try and create more democratic processes for programming values into AI systems. There was a really interesting experiment that happened last year. It was a collaboration with Anthropic, one of the companies building generative AI models. It's called Constitutional AI. And their approach was to crowdsource. This was done in the context of the US, with the US public. They crowdsourced the values from, I think it was either 1,000 or 2,000 people across the US to understand what are the values that you want programmed into this particular AI model. And then they have tried to train that model to reflect the values of the wider public. I think it's limited at the moment. It's incredibly complex to do. It probably doesn't have, I would say, broader application at a particularly big scale, but being able to have a more democratic process to understand the values that underpin and inform the way our AI models work is really important. And just to come back to the example I gave you from Nepal earlier before the break. So one of the things we did was work with crisis-affected communities and Red Cross volunteers to understand from their perspective, what are the things you want this model to optimize for? Should this model, which is determining who gets which aid, optimize for getting aid most quickly to the most number of people, or to people who are most vulnerable or most affected by the crisis? Now, these are all kind of design choices, and the model can optimize for any range of things. But one of the things that doesn't happen often with the design and process of AI systems at the moment is that involvement of communities in determining what are the things that this model really should be optimizing for. What are the things that we really want it to do? And I think that's one of the key things we need to see change in the way that AI is built, that process for involving people who are affected by AI systems in the design, the development, and the evaluation of them.
Thank you very much, Katie. Before giving the floor to Branko Milanovic, I'm a little bit worried about the possibility of subjecting values to democracy processes, because democracy has also some difficulties and flaws, and you cannot adopt values by majority, by the vote of the single majority. Sometimes the majority have the bad values, not the good ones. It's tricky and risky. Branko, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I will be brief on that. Of course, I was intrigued by this conversation about values and the artificial intelligence. I just happened to have read the unpublished version by a Portuguese author whom you must know, Bruno Massage. And he talks a lot about artificial intelligence and war. And when you give these examples, it occurred to me the following example. Let's suppose a robot is fighting a war. How is going to be programmed when he meets, it meets a soldier who is wounded and lying on the ground? Is the robot going to kill the soldier or not? You know, we as individuals, some of the soldiers now would kill that person. Others would not kill that person. What would the robot do? And basically, I think it depends on how the robot is being programmed. It seems to me he would react not on his own volition, but depending on how we have programmed him to behave. Okay, now going on an area that I know better, on PPPs. What the speaker has said, actually, I can see the logic. The question is oftentimes asked, but let me explain. When it comes to individuals, there is no doubt, and most of my presentation is about individuals, there is no doubt that PPP income is the relevant income, because PPP measures actual ability to consume or consumption that you have made. The fact that your haircut in poorer country, in let's suppose is Indonesia, is cheaper than in New York, doesn't make any difference in the sense that you are measuring haircuts. You want to measure how much goods and services individuals are able to purchase. And for individuals, there is no doubt that we have to go with PPP. Now, for the countries, that's a little bit more difficult. If you want to measure how much country is producing certain things, PPP is still the answer. There is no reason why you should treat a table or a glass or a computer produced in, India as less valuable than the same table produced in Norway. The fact that Norway has a price level which is 3 times as high doesn't make that table produced in India less valuable. But the speaker was right in the sense that transactions like exports and imports and all of that investments are made in real sort of dollars or euros or yuans at a market exchange rate. Yes, so for that reason, we might also, for the country comparisons, use GDP at market exchange rates. And there, indeed, the US is ahead of China. The gap is not very large, but I think it's 3-4 percentage points. But yes, the ranking is different. But for all that I've said about a reshuffling of individual positions, I don't think at all that it makes much sense to use market exchange rates. And final point, if we do use market exchange rates, actually inequality is much larger, because inequality is larger simply because the rich countries have a higher price level. So if you abstract from the higher price level, you actually end up with about 10-point difference, 10 Gini points difference in inequality being higher in the world in countries like Japan, Norway, and so forth, which do not get, quote unquote, punished, or whose incomes are not being reduced because of the fact that that things there are expensive.
Thank you very much. I think there are no more questions, and we have to put an end to this panel, this session. No? Not yet. Oh, yes, you forgot to answer the question about Latin America.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, actually. Latin America is an interesting continent in global inequality studies. Latin America is studied a lot for its own inequality within nation states. And as we know, over the last 20 years, Latin America was somewhat of an outlier in the sense that these countries still remain very unequal, but inequality has been reduced. Brazil is a very good example, and what drives, one of the reasons that drives a decline in inequality in Brazil is the very widespread program of cash transfers, conditional or unconditional. They are small amounts, but they do make a difference for the overall inequality. But when you come to global inequality, Latin America does not really play much of a role for the following reason. It is still, in terms of population, not sufficiently important. And secondly, it is in the middle of the global income distribution by ranking, the place where it has been before and now. With China and India and Asia, you have a dramatic change in the position. That dramatic change in the position makes then global income distribution look different. But Latin America has been at middling levels throughout all of this period, has not even become richer. Some countries have, but Chile, for example, has become significantly richer and so on, but it doesn't make the whole story different. It's a small country. And they have not become poorer. So really, the Latin America, the commentator was totally right. Actually, most of my presentations, I don't even mention Latin America because it doesn't have this dramatic role at the global level that other continents had, and which Africa is likely to have now because of the population growth and because of the absence of convergence. But it's a very, it's very good question. So let me just say one more thing about Latin America. If you look at Latin America, at countries of Latin America, the gaps in income between them are relatively small, mean incomes, relatively small compared to Asia. Asia is a continent with very rich countries like obviously Singapore, Japan, Korea, and very poor, Nepal, Bhutan, Burma, and so on. Latin America does not have such big gap, even between Chile and Uruguay on one hand, and maybe, I don't know what would be, probably Nicaragua or Guatemala on the other end. You know, the gaps are smaller between the countries.
Okay, thank you. Well, we still have some time, and there are there's two questions. Okay, so before, and then I will circulate the microphone for concluding remarks. But please, there are one on the left, one on the right. The first one is the one on the left. Micro is coming.
Hi, I'm a master's student in data science, and as such, I wanted to ask regarding the development of AI, mainly ethical development, and trying to steer AI towards a more equitable direction. How can we develop AI or what strategies can we follow in Europe to try and steer AI in the right direction without staying behind the United States and China?
Thank you. The other question over there.
Hi, Miguel Silva. First of all, thank you very much for such an insightful discussion today. So my question would be more addressed to Catarina. Taking into account the demographic context of our country and the capabilities of AI in the health sector, how critical do you think AI approach would be for the near future in our country? And if you think so, do you think that the government is aligned with this vision and whether there is a significant, let's say, investment in resources in this area, or whether it is more driven by the private sector?
Okay, thank you. No more questions. No, there is one more right behind.
Hello, my name is Mauricio Karkovic, and my question is for Mr. Milanovic, more specifically. Now that you mentioned the middle income in Latin America, the situation in which the whole region is, my question would be, what is now, let's say, the recipe, if there is, for that kind of country, for that kind of region, and the countries to kind of get out of this, no? I've heard, I think, before, and if not, I don't know if it's related, about the middle income trap of some countries. So what could they do in terms of their, I guess, economic policy? Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. There are no further questions. So there's one, and I guess it's the last one. Then we will make the concluding remarks and the replies to the questions.
Good afternoon. I'm Guilherme. I'm an high school student. And the question that I have, I think that's a question that needed to be asked, because some moments ago we were talking about the values and in AI and how we program AI with the right values. So I think the question that needed to be asked was, how can we decide what are the right values to give AI, to program AI?
that is the 1 trillion question. We are looking for that answer at least for the last 5,000 years. And, tomorrow will not be the eve of that day.
Okay, so in answer to the first question around how can we promote ethical, responsible AI development whilst also staying competitive, I think one thing that European countries could do much more strategically and at much greater scale is invest in support for digital public goods. So investing in the infrastructure that would enable more people to take advantage of and start to develop AI technologies. So that includes things like investing in open public data, open software, open hardware, open content, open AI models. At the moment, we're seeing, the consolidation, the monopolization of AI in some very big companies. Investing in open digital public goods would be a way of democratizing access to AI, and I think allowing many more countries to actually take advantage of some of the benefits it could bring. And that also speaks to Karim's point earlier around the kind of how to increase technology transfer and adoption. The question on how to decide the values, I think it needs to be done on a case-by-case basis, because values, different cultures and different countries have different sets of values. There is a really interesting study that was done a few years ago called The Moral Machine by researchers at MIT. And what they did was they gave, I think it was even millions of people who took part in this study, a series of problems. So they set them the scenario of, there is an autonomous vehicle and it is going to have an accident. Who should it kill? It's about to go over a zebra crossing. Should it swerve and kill the passengers, or should it kill the 2 elderly people who are on the zebra crossing? And it gave them a whole range of scenarios like that. And what it found was that actually people in different places had different value sets, which I think means there is no one set of good values, but we need to be ensuring that we are programming AI for the values of the communities who it is being affected by and who it's also being used by.
Thank you.
Well, on values, I think, on the contrary, I mean, there are sets of values we share across nations. The quest for freedom, tolerance, respect for human life, being secured, etc., etc. I think they're well shared. There are, of course, within societies disagreements between, progressists, conservatives, but this you find in any societies. But there's a minimum set of value that is been the quest of humanity since it started. So I think, the respect for human life. So I don't think there are so much divergences around the world. So this should be a good study to do, actually. So within countries, disagreements and at the global level, but there's a minimum set of value that epitomize what is human beings. So I think we shouldn't. This is discussion we often have with our friends in the East, in the West. The West and us and them, and you don't accept universal values, etc. I don't think it's true. I think this is a wrong debate. I think there are a minimum set of values we agree on, and we don't have to agree on everything to do things together, by the way. It doesn't take much to move human beings into aspiration, into revolutions, into asking for change. It needs a minimum set of values. Also to work together in society, in organizations. We never agree. I mean, in even a family you don't agree, but even with your wife you don't agree on everything. Thank God. I mean, but you agree on a minimum set of values that allow us to function together. I think that's I think a very simple message, but it's so true. So let's be careful about this, because this is the seeds of divisions, I would say, within nations, but among global south and the west and the global north, etc. This is the same kind of music we're hearing, and I think we have to be careful and to stay away from manipulation and wrong. Read the philosopher. You have the responses. Spinoza, Kant, etc. Read the Bible, the Quran, the Torah. You have all these things are there. It's been thousands of years. You'll find the response. So, but I think I don't know if we have. These are the things we should be teaching at university. Let's not forget about that. Even in your disciplines, I hope your students have some classes of philosophy and humanities, and it's a fundamental. The more these guys, these computer coders, will have a role in society, the more they need to get exposed to that. So, thank you.
That's for sure.
Thank you. Actually, yes. So a few years ago at IST, we started allowing them to take some classes at other. They can pick if they want to take a class on economics, on philosophy. So it's in their curriculum. So I agree with you that it's definitely important. Just to wrap up around values, there are different kinds of values. So there are these values that are structural to society. That's those values that bind us together. And then there are values that relate to specific applications, obviously. So in the field of healthcare, I can tell you that it was not that hard to have a set of dermatologists agreeing on what we call a reward table to mention what was the worst error that they could make in a diagnosis and the one that had the less impact. So there are errors that are structural and then values that are structural and others that are problem-specific. And I think that the second ones are the ones that, at least at this point, we should worry about in AI, because the others is what make us all be here together discussing this today. Regarding ethics, we have the European AI Act that is significantly different from what is happening in other countries. EU was a bit concerned about regulating things that still don't exist. So that's part of the problem. So they tried to do the same in California and the bill didn't pass. So, and how to implement ethics? I agree with Cassie that obviously making things open access and more than open access. So trying to collect not as much data as possible, but data as diverse as possible to actually cover the population, the demographics, and so on, because people are more focused on quantity than quality. And obviously that if we aim for quantity and not quality, we'll always end up with systems that are biased. That's 100% sure. And that goes a little bit in the direction of healthcare in Portugal. So obviously that it's way easier to collect data in big cities like Lisbon, Porto. Interestingly, it's harder to get data from Algarve, although the demographics in Algarve is significantly different at the moment. Unfortunately, I think that if we started using some AI tools nowadays in Portugal, it will be very helpful in the healthcare system. So in places where we don't have as many doctors, at least to pinpoint patients that should be guided earlier to places where they could have assistance, definitely. At the same time, I know that AI systems are not in that phase yet, often. So, for example, the Portuguese healthcare system, I know that they are trying an application for skin cancer, but this application was developed in Austria. So I don't know how it will translate to Portugal. They are running a clinical trial now. So anything that we want to do here will have to pass by clinical trials because we don't have that many companies developing for Portuguese data. So they develop based on data from other European countries. That does not mean that it will translate directly here. In terms of investments, well, we have several startups starting now. So even at IST, we have one called Breast Screening AI that is aiming for early breast cancer diagnosis. There are other startups from Faculdade de Engenharia do Porto. So there are some things going on, and this new investment on startups, I think that is helping developing some tools that can definitely create an impulse on AI in Portugal. We also had some funding programs for universities. At least I applied to a few a couple of months ago. So I think that, yeah, creating these dynamics for the startups, for example, is definitely a way to push for new developments on AI and healthcare in Portugal.
Thank you very much, Catarina. Branko, can you give your input now? You have no... okay, it's okay.
I will be very brief. Let me try to wrap up what I was saying so that the three key messages are clear. The first message is that, of course, we have had over the last 40 years significant increases in inequalities within most nation states at different levels of income, starting from the US to India, for example. That was statement number one. Statement number two, that in the meantime, because of high growth rates in Asian countries, and specifically in China, the inequality between global citizens has gone down for the first time in 200 years. And point number three is, has happened, we have had a significant reshuffling in income positions between different parts of the world, with, for the first time, very strong presence of Asian citizens in the top income groups that were before basically reserved for West European and North American countries, which still, of course, remain very highly placed. And just one point that I just always want to mention, and people really don't have an intuition towards that, is that if you take rich countries, the median person in those countries is at the 91st percentile in the world. People don't realize how high placed are actually people with median income in Western countries. So they are not around the 50th percentile in the world, they are at the 91st percentile in the world, which has implications for climate change and everything else. Finally, there was a question asked for me about Latin America. I think that's a different topic. I'm not really somebody whom one should ask really how Latin America should develop. I simply noticed that they have remained at the middle income level worldwide. Of course, their income level has increased, but at the rate at which the world income, more or less at the rate at which world income has risen. So that's, I think, it's a different question. Anyway, so thank you very much for inviting me. It was a pleasure for me to be there, even if I had to be virtually there. Or, well, maybe that's one of the advantages of the new technologies. You can have people from all around the world actually sitting in their different apartments and talking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation and your very, very useful arguments and discussions. Well, I will conclude in English. I think now the time has elapsed. It's the time to finish. Just a small reference. I had some more things to say, but for the next time maybe. We didn't discuss, although there was a brief reference from Karim, the major issue is not the most imminent, but it's the biggest question, the biggest issue on AI. It's not values. The problem is not values. The problem is governance. And there is no good answer to the governments, to the governance of AI. Of course, there is the possibility of a world government, but every time one talks about world government, is the third World War coming. If you do it at the national level, you are creating a lot of complications, not only technical complications, because there are no borders in the sky, or you may, or at least try to do it on a regional basis. That's what the European Union is trying to do. But I anticipate a total mess every time there will be a discussion between the Germans and the Estonians and the Spanish and the Portuguese. It's not an easy task. And that's the big the big issue we have with artificial intelligence. Thank you very much for my colleagues of Painel. It was a great pleasure, and thank you to the audience.